Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today in this webinar for CMS platform selection for law firm website. Um, First and foremost, I quickly want to talk about myself. I'm Mukesh. I'm a marketing technologist. I have worked with CMS platform for a while now and helped different organizations like the right fit CMS platforms for them. So today I'll be talking about CMS platform selection specifically for law firms. So as I was saying, the objective really is to talk about platform selection, CMS platform selection for law firm websites. So we have broken this webinar down into two parts. One, we want to present you with our POV for law firm websites, how they're different, and then we'll talk about the CMS selection process and what should be taken into account. We will bear few details about what we do in terms of CMS selection under the hood. So the law firm websites today, what we see are largely static content stores. I would say conventionally they have been static content stores. Now clients find it difficult to navigate to relevant pieces of information. There is no real targeting there and no real findability, if you will. And there is very little done in terms of building intelligence in the system. So customers cannot really be analyzed, and the user behavior is not really tracked by and large. The other problem that we have with law firm scenarios is that though there are quite a few initiatives and programs running from a digital standpoint where you are tapping into the potential of diverse digital channels, the issue with that is really that they don't really talk to each other. And that in turn results in a scenario where the data and thus these disparate channels are fairly siloed and they don't provide unified communication and messaging to the client, to the visitor. So what you see on your screen now is our point of view on what is really the future for law firm websites. So we really believe that law firm websites have to transition from functionalities which have been conventionally the key focus for most of the website custodians to engagement, to true engagement. So functionalities are merely table stakes, whether it's search or multi-device or social integration, these are all table stakes. The focus now needs to move to engagement. And a good example of such engagement are consulting websites, which, like law firms, have large volumes of content, but they do a very good job in terms of bringing their content to the fore to engage their visitors, to engage their clients. Now, because we're talking about content management systems, CMS is really the linchpin to your digital strategy. It's not really about selecting yet another IT system, if you will, as a part of your information management strategy. It's really the centerpiece to your digital marketing strategy. But choosing the right CMS can be a very convoluted process in itself. And I'll talk about it, why it can be convoluted, why it can be complex. Because what we have seen in our experience is that CMS is not just what you see at the outset. A CMS is much more than what it is perceived to be. It has so many other touch points associated with it, which impact different channels, different digital entities in one way or another. So one of the problems that we have seen whenever we have helped our customers in terms of platform selection is sometimes they have a very narrowed focus on just selecting a CMS platform, and it's not so much about the other platforms that are out there in the overall ecosystem. So what we need to really be cognizant of is that CMS is only one of those entities, and it needs to interface with, a lot many other systems out there for you to be successful in terms of your digital strategy for your firm. And this is the visual that you see on my screen right now is a symbolic demonstration of what the ecosystem could look like. So what you really see here is a hub and spoke model. And I think this visual in itself, it just speaks volumes, because what you really see is that your web content management system is really the hub to every other system that you have from your digital enablement perspective. So whether it's your marketing automation system, email system, CRM system, LexisNexis, or some kind of an asset management system, some proposal generation system for law firms particularly, some communities like alumni, diversity, other kind of portals that you have in there. For all of this, your web content management system is a hub. It acts as the centerpiece. It connects all the dots in one way or another. Now, when you're selecting your web content management system with all these parameters that you have in your mind and that I just alluded to, you end up in a situation where you have, you have a basket of options, as I said here, to choose from, and it's really difficult because you cannot really see it clearly, in terms of its value, in terms of the fit for your needs. So now I think I'll spend a moment to talk about the type of CMS that, in my view, law firm websites or law firms by and large really need. So you really need a CMS that drives engagement, and this goes back to the slide that I showed you earlier, that we really believe and we really see in our experience and from our customers that we have in the legal industry, that law firm websites would metamorph into engagement engines, and they really need to drive engagement. They really need to create that experience that really engages your clients, your visitors. And as I've been saying all along, CMS wouldn't just be limited to a content editing and management tool. It would be more than that. It would be all those capabilities under the skin that an engagement engine would require, if you will. So some stats about engagement by and large. It's not just that law firms are lagging behind in terms of engagement, but as engagement, from our viewpoint, is very critical for law firms. We just wanted to put some stats out there in terms of what's happening from a digital marketing lay of the land perspective. And we see that this is a Forrester, from a Forrester report where they deciphered that only 5% were really prepared to execute cross-channel engagement strategy. This is another one where we found that only 10% believe that they're really able to execute cross-channel engagements. This is another report that we are referring to. So I just wanted to give you some data points, but then I want to bring you back to this whole importance of engagement, and from a law firm perspective, what does it really mean, and how do we look at it? So from a marketer's perspective, when we think about engagement and when we talk about really reaching out to our customers, what we really talk about are these different channels, if you will. So we talk about the web experience for my firm, right? I talk about the mobile experience. I talk about the email experience, the campaigns that I run, how's that experience coming. Then we talk about the social media experience. Some of the firms are really active there, some are not. But what we really talk about is really cross-channel engagement across channels, how we push content, how we push information across these channels, and how we make the firm brand show up across these distinct silos. But from a client's perspective, it's really about relevance. It's really about getting to be able to touch and feel your brand. It's really about consuming the right content that I really want to consume and where I want to consume it. So this is an example of the different touch points, potential touch points for clients. So while commuting or meetings or at lunch, different stages and different devices. So devices, multi-device is again a table stake now, as I said. So their tablets, their phones, their desktops, and people use all these devices, the multi-device phenomenon, seamlessly based on their convenience. And so is the case with channels like email, web. You have social channels like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, so on and so forth. So what we're really saying is that there needs to be a confluence of the marketer's perspective, which is really a channel-centric perspective, and the client's perspective, which is, my convenience, the information that is relevant to me, and what I really want to consume and ingest, right? So that view versus the firm's view, the marketer's view, that really needs to combine and coincide, if you will. So that's a perspective on engagement and what really needs to be done. So because this conversation really is about CMS and what type of CMS would you need and how would you really select it as a law firm website, as a law firm, if you will. So the long and short of what we're really saying in terms of a point of view around engagement, we're saying that your CMS should be really able to provide the client with the right message at the right time and in the right device, whatever that multi-device is. So this is what you really need. I mean, there are other parameters which are like general CMS selection parameters, but for you, engagement is going to be the bedrock because you are building your website for the future, and you're really building something that people relate with, that resonates with your clients. So you need to account for these three key underpinnings. So I would spend a little bit more time talking about some brass tacks here, and then we will jump into the weeds and talk about CMS selection, which is the focus for today's webinar. Because we're talking about engagement, you cannot not talk about personalization. So most of these contemporary content management systems have this capability to be able to personalize content based on user personas. So that means they do have the capability to identify user personas. And it pretty much applies to different B2B organizations in different ways. So you have every marketing organization has their segmentation and profiling done, and based on that, you have a system that is able to really kind of connect with that strategic direction and accordingly funnel the right content to those personas over an engagement journey. So that's an important part of that. Now, I wanted to give an example of that from one of our implementations for Dentons. This is again an example of location-based personalization. There's some snapshots of that. And how you really make content relevant based on context. So context is key, and it's one example of how you could really engage. So this is one snapshot of that. Then I want to talk about some other tactical elements which are relevant for law firm websites in particular. So one of them is site search, and most of these contemporary CMS systems, they provide you with this in-built site search. But what you really got to understand and wrap your brain around is the idea if you really need the type of search that allows you to drill down to specific attributes of content. So which would mean that you would really need to model your content. And based on my experience with law firm websites, I can tell you that in case of law firm websites, content modeling and relationships between different content entities, for instance, your bios and practices, publications, they are all intertwined. They talk to each other, right? So one of the most important aspects of implementing a new content management for your website is really to define the right content model. And this the site search is one of those very prominent user experience element or navigational elements that could build upon that content model. So if you have the right content structure, the taxonomy defined, you have the capability to go to, let's say, a bio search and drill down to specific attributes based on practices, publications, offices, so on and so forth. You could have those facets filled in. Now, all the CMS systems from what is built within them will not be able to provide you with that. So what you really got to assess is, do you really need something as robust as that, or can you live with something basic, right? So that would be available within any CMS system. So that is one assessment in particular. Then we were also talking about measurability, that not much is measured, there is not much intelligence built into the law firm websites of this day and age. So most of these contemporary CMS systems, they do have some kind of analytics capabilities, and they're also integrated with most of the contemporary analytics solutions like Google Analytics, Omniture, so on and so forth. So these will be able to pull that information in terms of user behavior and the different types of reports that you need based on your organizational needs within your CMS system. So it could be a CMS integration. So so that's another area which needs to be perhaps taken into account, specifically from a law firm scenario perspective. Okay, so switching gears, I think now it's time I talk about the topic of the day, which is CMS selection. So I'm a big fan of Philip Kotler, like many of you out here, I guess. And he did say this wonderful line that people don't want a drill machine, they want a hole in the wall, right? And that's so true. You end up buying a drill machine because you have to put a hole in the wall. And that's what that's about. So the key point here is that you have to know your requirements. You don't have to be swayed by what vendors that they push you to try to send features. That's not what you need. What you really need to understand is what you as an organization need, right? It's not what I sell as a vendor. It's what you need. So, so that's what this slide is about. It's about where do you really start. And you really start with the blueprint. You really start with the foundation. It might seem very basic, but it's very relevant. You start with these very basic steps, and it really includes something as basic as identifying a team. So you have to identify a team at the very outset that is the right team. That is a team that will really take this project from point A to point B in terms of getting it done. So in most organizations, in my consulting experience with CMS implementation, I can really tell you that most of the organizations have this problem where there is no real team defined at the very outset. So that is a problem at times. The second one is about budget. So you have to have a process of budget assignment, so on and so forth. You have to understand that though there are scenarios where you have those very well hit it running, but depending upon your complexity, there is a good probability that there would be a substantial investment in terms of effort, time, money when you actually implement it on a product. So they don't really show you the whole picture. They would give you the product features, but that's not all you need. You need to understand the complete context. You need to understand, in most of the cases, that you buy the product, but it's not really good enough off the shelf. You have to build over that product to be able to cater to your organizational needs, right? For all that, so you will have budget situations if you do not have this thought through. So you have to have all of this process mapped, and you have to have all the budget aspects thought through, and the processes and approval mechanisms defined internally from a business case perspective. You also have to have a decision-making process internally, is what we have witnessed. So if you do not have the stakeholders identified and who the buck really stops at from a team perspective, from a stakeholder perspective, you would have problems in terms of making decisions, whether it's around making those decisions for vendor selection or platform implementation or many other gates within vendor selection, I would say. Then I want to talk a little bit about needs recognition and content modeling. Needs recognition is a big subject. It's really requirement engineering. So you really need to understand your requirement. It's easier said than done. So one part is really the functional requirement, which is what you really need. It's really about the features. From a presentation perspective, that I need a masthead, and I need a responsive design. It's all functional requirement in one way or another. But then there are non-functional requirements, and what they really mean is scenarios like scale. Now, think about if you're a global law firm and you have offices across multiple countries. How do you make sure that your website, from a performance perspective, the same way it's accessible in one country versus another, right? I mean, the performance is not really compromised from one request source to another. So behind the veil, what I'm really saying is that you really need to build an architecture that could support that kind of performance across countries. Now, this is a very specific example, but it's a non-functional requirement. So another one could be about traffic, right? You have a really high traffic website. You need to, and when I say you, I mean you or your vendor or whoever helps you select the right platform. They need to assess the volume of traffic that your content management system will be able to support, and if it reaches the brink, how would it really handle it? So the boundary analysis of how the traffic would be handled, how do you need to scale it up, scale it out, all those technical details. Now, all those needs need to be identified in some form. You need to identify it, you need to hire a consultant to help you identify it. But that's very important. Without that, there is a good chance that you would end up buying a product that you would only later realize is not a very good fit for your website or for your web properties overall. And then I talked about content modeling. And I gave you this example of relationships between different entities from a legal website perspective. And it's very relevant because what we have seen is that not many other web properties are so much related with one another in terms of the content entities. So relationships are really important in legal websites, and you have to identify all these entities, see how they're related, and how those relationships will be brought over and modeled in the new platform. Now, this is not something that can happen as an afterthought, because maybe your relationships are such that they have to be managed the way they are managed in the as-is system, but your new system does not support relationships like that. It does not support taxonomy like that. It does not support content structure like that. It does not support a relationship between, let's say, practices, publications, and bios. That's a problem, because I need those relationships like that. So this needs to be thought through. So some due diligence here. So this is just a primer, if you will. So you need to start with the blueprint, is the net. You need to start with laying some ground rules. Now this slide is really about the fact that though you would and many other firms would like the CMS to be the only system they have to deal with, but your CMS can only do so much. So what you really need to do is define a boundary of your project or your scope, right? What does it do? What does it not do? That will really help you identify which product fits versus which product is not such a good fit. So there would be scenarios where you would want the CMS to be taking care of your portals, like the alumni portal as an example, or some intranet portal that you're running. There would be scenarios where you want, let's say, your portals to be really a very interactive community. But does your CMS have that capability for it to be a really collaborative platform, even that one microsite? Maybe not. So what I'm really saying is that you need to be very clear about what your objectives are with this CMS initiative this time around. What does it do versus what it doesn't do? Whether mobile website, mobile first is a part of this initiative or it's outside it. Whether intranet is a part of this initiative within it or outside it. So on and so forth. So then we come back to the question of the complexity of the selection process, right? So what are some of the reasons why the selection process for CMS platforms is so convoluted, it's so complex? So one of the things, as I said in the last slide, that it's not really capturing to all of your digital needs. So thinking of the CMS as the holy grail is not right. You need to define the boundary around it, and you really need to be clear what it needs to accomplish, what your CMS implementation needs to be accomplishing over the course of that project. Then it's also about commoditization. It's also about that there's so much to choose from at this point that, I like to say that chaos and confusion is the only constant for CMS selection at this point in time. So there are ample products, and the only good job they really do is to confuse the buyer about which one is the right fit, because all of them claim to do the same thing, and they claim to do everything in the best of possible ways. So it's very natural that the buyer will be thoroughly confused. So that's another reason why it's so complex. And other key point is that technology is changing so fast, and without naming any names of product vendors, I can tell you from my experience that there have been vendors who have not been able to adapt to the changing technology underneath, and they have really not been able to, catch up later with other contemporary platforms, and they were like giants in the industry. So that has happened. So you as a platform vendor have to be able to adapt to the technology changes happening underneath. So that's that. Now let's talk about platform selection. And I kind of alluded to this, that most of the times you will see that sales reps are kind of pushing you to make decisions. They pull this trick of giving you a special discount price and all that. But you are the one, you as marketers, you as vendor managers, you are the ones who have to drive the selection of platforms, who have to drive what you really want to get. As I said, it's not about the features that the sales rep want to sell to you. It's really about what you need. So, so this slide again talks about the same problem. With an example and analogy of a store that you go out there. So a lot of commoditization and a lot of proliferation. So there are scenarios where there is one system and it can do a lot of things. It can do web content management, which is like basic content management, and DAMs, which is digital asset management. So I'll take a moment to explain that. So all the digital assets, like your PDF files, your images, your videos, there are dedicated systems for that. Now, if you really do not need a very robust DAM system, most of these CMS systems have a DAM built within, right? So there is a lot of overlap within what these different systems offer. And as I was mentioning earlier, it's very, very natural that the buyer would be absolutely confused by all these offerings out there. Okay, so moving on. So that's about some context of what's happening out there with these CMS vendors in the fray. But what is the road ahead? What does it look like? I, as someone who is looking for a solution, what are the next steps for me as a buyer, right? So it's really about two things, right? It's really about first getting yourself educated. So you become an informed buyer. You understand that you have to really wrap your arms around this whole platform selection, and you have to educate yourself on what's happening, the latest and the greatest. So that's one. Then, as I said, you need to focus on your requirements. You do not focus on what the product offers, because most of the time, in all probability, what product offers is great, but it's not relevant to you. You don't need that. So you need to take that into account. Third point, you need solutions. It's kind of related to the needs part, but you need solution to your problems. You're buying this because you need that platform to solve a problem. Most of the platforms will solve many problems out of the box, and some problems could be solved via the implementation vendor, the system integrators. And then we talked about the team part of it, that you have to set up a team which is very focused day in and day out in terms of making this initiative successful, and they are equipped to make this successful. And then you have to follow a process, which is what I would talk about. What would that process really be? So it's consulting firms like eDynamic. We do a lot of vendor selection, platform selection. for a wide array of digital platforms, including CMS. So you really need to follow a process. So I would just bear that process at a high level to you in a bit. And then you need to define a roadmap, and there are a variety of factors and parameters that you need to take into account. So these are some of those steps that you need to take into account in terms of really understanding this beef. Okay, so education part, there are analyst firms like Gartner, Forrester, and news sources like CMS Wire. So they're very focused on content management. CMS Wire particularly is content management. Forrester and Gartner do a lot of other things, but they do provide their services, research reports on content management. So you have to educate yourself. You could subscribe to these, buy some papers, and wrap your brain around digital platforms, content management platforms. We talked about the team. Few points here that need to be accounted for. You really have to keep in mind that it's not really a technology project. It's really marketing that should drive it. It's really the business owner. So the key decision maker is marketing here. What you really need to do in terms of the team is that you have to bring people that bring a wide variety of expertise, and that that can come from marketing, IT, and communication, so on and so forth. And you have to see that that team is jointly responsible, and that team practically understand what needs to be done. That practically understand what your needs are. Whether the features really map to those needs, they cater to those needs or not, so on and so forth. So it's really a beyond theory team, as I call it. Okay, so let's quickly now talk about the process, right? And this is the secret sauce, an abstracted view of that I'm bearing to you today. So at eDynamic, whenever we do vendor selection, platform selection, we follow a 4-step process of discovery, analysis, investigation, and selection. So what this is really about is, in discovery, what we really do is we identify the team members, the project owners, the line of business owners, IT stakeholders. There could be other stakeholders, and there is eDynamic, of course. And we do these sessions, which are initial discovery sessions. So we identify and establish the business case, understand what is the real charter behind this initiative, what are the triggers, the schedule, is it tied to some kind of marketing programs, and are there some campaigns that need to kind of interface with this initiative overall in some way or another, all that. So we do those discussions with project owners, we do those with individual stakeholders, from communications, from marketing, from legal, so on and so forth. And then we also do sessions with IT, because most of the times IT is the arm that's running systems. So from an architectural perspective, from a capacity perspective, all technical things, I won't get into the details, but we talk to them. And what comes out of this initial discovery are a few things. And one of these is a project vision document. It's like a charter. It's like what this project really has to accomplish. It lays out the overall objectives, the overall success criteria for the project, if you will. Then we also identify what the different line of business objectives are, and that's important. So there are a set of different exercises that we do when we do these sessions with our customers. And what we realize many times is that communications objectives might be slightly different from what let's say IT wants from the web content management system. So all of these objectives need to be identified. We go through an exercise where we try to list them, prioritize them, so on and so forth. So we just identify these objectives first. Then the important bit that is created and informed by these objectives and vision documents are these visitor personas and stakeholder personas. So we identify personas. Personas from a visitor perspective, that would be interfacing with your web properties. In law firms, there could be more than one web property, not just your main website, but it could be other websites like career and diversity, alumni, and all that, right? So, the visitor personas across these properties, what are those personas? And typically, the marketing team, the communications team, they have a good handle of what those personas could look like. So in the interview sessions, it kind of surfaces. And then there is an exercise we can conduct to identify the stakeholder personas who are like behind the wheel guys who interface with the system. And the most useful part that churns out of this is the user stories in the initial discovery. So user stories is captured in a document. So it's just like use cases in a way from a user interaction standpoint. The next step in this 4-step model that we have is the step of analysis. Now, what we really do in analysis is, again, we interface with the same group of owners and stakeholders. But this time around, our focus is eliciting requirements, understanding requirements beyond just objectives. So we really kind of go into the weeds, try to identify the processes, how they do it now, what are the gaps in there, what are their desires, and based on these requirements, when we get them from owners, project owners, stakeholders, from different LOBs, what we really do is we refine the user stories that we start creating in the discovery phase. And all of this kind of rolls into a requirement document, and we call it as a fact base. It's not really an implementation requirement document. It's more from a vendor selection standpoint. It's a list of all those user stories, and we create this fact-based requirement document. And we create a persona document. We identify the personas. There's a use of these personas. I'll talk about it in a bit in one of these next steps. And then these user stories are further refined. So you have the requirement document, an exhaustive list of all these use cases. You have interaction user stories, and you have personas identified. The next step is what we call investigation. Now what happens is that we identify the vendor universe from a CMS standpoint. Then another thing that we do is we identify the must-meet criteria for your firm. Now that's important. Now it's not some generic tool that we could use for you and we could use for everyone else. It's about your specific needs. So we identify that criteria, the must-meet criteria. So there is a tool that we create, and we customize it for every initial consulting session that we do before implementation, if we do implementation. So we identify that, and we then identify the selection criteria. So one is must-meet, and then some is not really must-meet, but it is still part of the selection criteria. Then we also identify the demonstration criteria, the demo criteria. So about vendors that are selected, that are chosen, and you know, what is the criteria that you would, that filter that you would have so that you identify them for demo, right? So there would be like a large universe of vendors. How do you really shortlist them? And then the thing that we do in investigation is we really identify and define a POC, a proof of concept. So this is not always applicable. It could be, it could not be, depending upon your scenario and how much time you have. But we like to do that. We like vendors that pass through few gates in terms of the shortlisting process to create a proof of concept, to be able to showcase you know, the use cases that we lay out for them, which are very specific to your firm requirements. And as an outcome, we have the selection criteria. We have a vendor list identified from the vendor universe, as I said. We also have, as an outcome of this, an RFI that we could send to vendors, and we do send to vendors. We have a demo script that is created out of it that could be sent to those selected few vendors. And we have a POC design document. So a design document is a little more, it's not really a visual design, it's really a technical design document. So where you have to give a technical view of the requirement to the vendor. So that's a design document. And we also have all the criteria defined for the proof of concept. So you have the demo and proof of concept are different. You might ask more vendors to demo it, and you might only have few to create the proof of concept based on the fact that they are selected out of that group of vendors that you ask to demo their capability. So demo could be generic. Proof of concept is very specific to your needs. I just want to be clear with that. Investigation, pretty important part of the 4-step process. And once the RFI is done, the demo scripts are done, the proof of concept is done, then it really can, you know, really narrows down the scope of what needs to be done thereafter. So the last step is really about selection, and it's really about sending the RFPs, identifying those demo cut vendors, and reviewing those RFI responses that you solicited from these vendors that you send the RFI requests to, and then you set up demos, you discuss those demos based on, you know, the responses in those demos, you score them. So what we do that you do not see here, we create a scoring matrix, if you will, that's the scoring system, where based on the criteria that you lay out for the vendor, which is your criteria, which is very specific to your needs, your firm requirements, we are able to assess every vendor's response for demonstrations, for proof of concept, for different gates that we, there is a system associated, which gives the scores to every vendor. And this happens across the journey, across the selection process. The scoring happens. So as a result of this, the outcome really is that you have scored RFI responses, you have scored POC implementations, you have scored demonstrations, and you have vendor selection. Typically, what really happens is that you know, it's a group of 2 to 3 vendors, and then that you select, and then based on the different parameters, you identify which one is the right fit. So it would be more than one vendor that that could perhaps be in the final selection. Okay, so the next step really is the view that I want to share with you is the view of the selection funnel. And this is another view of the same topic that I've been talking about, the same process. And this gives you a perspective on how we go about defining these gates, these stages, where the number of vendors that participate in the process can be really reduced based on these filters that you identify, right? So you have these initial list of vendors, and how many of them really comply to the must-meet requirements. Then you have the must-have gate, which is another gate, which is which is another set of filters that are associated with it. There is a requirement criteria gate. Once the requirements are identified, there is another level of filtering that happens, and then there is this demo criteria gate based on the user stories, proof of concepts, personas. You have another filtering that happens at this level. So this is the funnel view. I will sense and assume that marketers can relate to this funnel view as they deal with marketing funnels quite a bit. So I just wanted to have this representative view of how these vendors are shortlisted and how they kind of pass through all these different filters and gates. And then you have the right set of final vendors identified towards them. So the next slides are really about. I don't know if you can see my screen. Let me just see. Okay, I'm sorry about the logistic issue. It seems we had a slight hiccup. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen now. So this is another view of how these vendors are identified across the pyramid in terms of the buckets that are out there, from upper range products to mid range products to low range products. So upper range products are products that are kind of more than 500K in licensing. They have long implementation life cycle, more than 12 months, if you will. A lot of features, not really all the features are all the time relevant and useful to every implementation. Then there is this bucket for mid to upper range products, which are like 100 to 300K in licensing. Again, I'm just giving you these high-level brackets. It could be plus or minus 20-25%. It's like 6 to 12 months of implementation. That's another bucket, and most of the recommendations supported by this mid to upper range product category. And then you have low mid-range products. They have limited capabilities. They are constraints there in terms of what you could do, in terms of extending them and really making them work to your needs. That's about how the vendor landscape is kind of set up. And in continuation to that thought process, I do want to give you this perspective on how the vendor universe is kind of laid out and what are the different filters associated across the pyramid for each of these. So for the wider vendor universe, you have filters for budget, vendor history and longevity for mid to upper tier vendors, and then there are filters that align with your goal in terms of capability alignment. Then there are filters for at the RFI level. Then there are filters at the demo level. And I've talked about all of this, but I'm just giving you another view of this, of how this really moves through the funnel, how this really kind of gives you that refined set of vendors that really map to your needs. So that's another view of that. Then at the end, I just wanted to name some names in terms of the vendor landscape. So there are platforms like Autonomy and IBM, Oracle, enterprise platforms. There are other platforms, Adobe, CQ5, Sitecore, and quite a few others in here. But these are some of the common platforms that are used and implemented. Now, because it's not about platforms, it's about selection, I wanted to kind of conclude this with a slide, which is that don't just think in terms of your website and in terms of your narrowed objective of just a CMS. Think in terms of parameters. Think in terms of those criteria, if you will, that can really make it a good or bad selection over a longer period of time. So if you see this visual on my screen, we're talking about parameters like personalized engagement, important parameter for law firms, support. So does the vendor really provide you support in terms of product support? Because believe me, you will have situations with every implementation where you would actually need vendor support. Configuration, how much of it is really configurable? And in your scenario, from a law firm perspective, you would need a fairly configurable and customizable system. Not that you have to change the way the system operates in terms of its fundamentals, but otherwise, from an overall interaction perspective, from an overall content modeling perspective. So all of that needs to be enabled in one way or another. User scenarios, what kind of user scenarios can the system support? And this is where the demo scripts, the proof of concepts are really useful. They come in handy, where you can really map them to user stories that you think are important to you. So user stories, for instance, user stories like how an alumni interacts with an alumni portal, right? What does he see? When does he see it? Maybe he can only log in after 1 month of leaving the firm. I'm just giving you some scenarios. I'm just making them up. But these are scenarios, right? User scenarios. Now, these are scenarios that apply to your firm. Your CMS system has to be able to support these, right? Then integration. So you would have integration with so many other systems, in your firm, SharePoint, any other intranet system, any proposal generation system, e-cards, some kind of an email system. Many CMS systems have these capability within, but you might, in all probability, have these systems already, or some other system that you want the system to interact with, CRM system, right? So many other systems. So your CMS has to have the capability to be able to interact with these systems. And as I said, and as I've been saying from the very beginning, that engagement is key. How do you really accomplish engagement? You enable true engagement by getting a single view of the customer. So engagement and analytics are two aspects of the same coin, right? So you have the right analytics, you are able to engage the right way with the right persona. So that's how it works. Hosting, architecture, I talked about architecture, distributed architecture, and all of that. Though it might seem very technical, non-fancy, but it's very important when you're choosing a platform. Multi-device, the whole responsive design thing, devices are changing by the minute. Does the system really have the capability to adapt to changing screen sizes and different operating systems, Android to iOS and so many others, right? Reporting. Now these examples, these are parameters that you need to think of when you're thinking about selecting a right platform. Just some parameters, not an exhaustive list, because the process is fairly complex. It has much more than this. Okay, so I think that covers what I really wanted to discuss today. I will be open to take any questions if we have any so far. So Anirban, over to you if you have any questions.
Thanks, Muktesh. We do have a lot of questions, but since we are kind of running out of time, so we'll get back to the questions after the webinar via emails. So at this note, I would like to thank everyone for attending our webinar. We hope you found it informative. The recording of today's webinar will be available on our website within the next 3 business days. We'll also be sharing the webcast URL with all the attendees via email. Please feel free to reach out to us at contact@edynamic.net for any questions you may have. Thank you once again. Thank you, Muktesh.
Thank you, everyone.